Hello and welcome to Elemental Hardware Enrichment. My name is Aiden, and today we're going to be building Battle Sling. Before we get started with building, let's go ahead and introduce the supplies that we're going to need for this project. So for this project, we're going to need a damp rag, a bottle of glue, a hardware tray, a piece of sandpaper, a hammer or sanding block, a roll of tape, a pencil, and our safety glasses. Let's go ahead and put those on now. Now that we've introduced all of our supplies, let's go ahead and talk about the tools that we're going to need for this project. So for this project, I have my toolkit right here. I'm going to go ahead and open it up and take out the tools that I need. What I'm going to need is a screwdriver handle. To go along with that, I'm going to need a number 1 Phillips head bit. So I'm going to look for the PH1 bit right here. That's our number 1 Phillips head. I'm also going to need a measuring tape and a hammer. Now that we've got all of our tools, let's go ahead and close up our toolkit and get it out of our way. All right, we've got our supplies, we've got our tools, so the next step will be to open up our box and talk about the materials we're going to find inside. It's time to open up our box. So to open the box, I'm going to be using the claw of the hammer, and I'm going to be sliding it down the tape where the 2 box flaps meet to split it open. Once I've split the tape, I can go ahead and grab the corners of the box and pry them up. The first thing I'm going to be taking out is some packing paper, and I just want to make sure to open that up to make sure there's no small pieces wrapped up inside of it before getting it out of my way. Alright, now we can start talking about the different wood parts we're going to find inside the box. The first piece I'm taking out is going to look like this, and this is going to be our field. You'll notice that the field has a rabbit running all the way around one edge. Along with the field, we have 2 long walls, and you'll notice that the long walls have holes running down them. There's 2 of them, and they are exactly the same. Along with the long walls, we also have 2 short walls, and these are just shorter rectangles. They don't have any holes, and they are identical as well. The last wood part we're going to be taking out is going to be our center wall. And then along with the center wall, we actually also have a bag of our wood pucks, and there should be 12 of these. The very last thing we're going to take out is our hardware. Now that we've got everything out of the box, let's get it out of our way. All right, we've introduced all of our wood parts, so the next step will be to talk about our hardware. It's time to talk about our hardware. So I have my hardware bag right here. I'm going to go ahead and take out the different hardware components and go over each one. The first thing I'm going to be taking out is this bag here, and inside this bag I have my 3/4 inch finish nails. Next I have another bag, and inside this bag I have my number 4 by 5/8 wood screws. Next I have a small piece of paper containing my rubber bumpers. And the very last thing I have in this bag are my 2 elastic strings. Now that we've introduced all of our hardware, the next step will be to sand our wood parts. All right, we're ready to get started with sanding. So I have my sanding or hammer block right here. I'm going to go ahead and set it onto the soft side of the sandpaper and then fold the edges of the sandpaper over it to form my sanding block. Next, I'm going to go ahead and start sanding my wood parts. The first piece I'm going to start with are my long sides. I'm going to focus primarily on these cut or end grain edges and make sure they're nice and smooth before moving on to the next piece. Now, as I'm sanding the field, you might notice that I'm taking extra time to sand out this rabbet around the edge of the field. I also want to pay special attention to sanding this edge of the field here, this flat edge on the inside of the rabbet, because that's where the pucks are going to go, and we want to make sure it's super smooth so that the pucks can slide easily. So I'm going to go ahead and sand this area a little bit extra. Now that I've sanded all of these parts, the next step will be to sand my pucks. Now, like I mentioned before, it's really important that the pucks slide easily along the field. So we want to make sure to sand the top and bottom. And we're also going to round over the edge on each side of the puck to make it slide a little bit easier. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to start by just sanding the top. And then I'll flip it over and sand the bottom. And then I want to sand around the edges. And now what I'm going to do is go ahead and round over those edges as well. So I'm going to place the sandpaper at a slight angle against the edge of the puck, and I'm going to run it back and forth as I rotate the puck in my fingers to just slightly round over that edge. And again, that's just going to allow it to slide a little more freely along the field. Once I've done it on one side, I can flip it over and do the same thing on the opposite end. And I want to be sure to sand it evenly all the way around. Once I've done that with one puck, I can go ahead and do it with the rest. So let's go ahead and do that now. We've finished sanding all of our wood parts, so now we're going to go ahead and take our rag and we're going to wipe up any of the excess dust that we created while sanding. Once you've wiped down all your parts, make sure to wipe down your work surface as well. All right, we've got everything sanded and cleaned up, and now we're ready to start our build. We're ready to get started with our build. The first step will be to begin to attach our long walls to our field. So we want to ensure that our field is resting on our work surface with this rabbet facing up, and we're going to be attaching the long walls to the long side edges of the field. Before we do that, we want to take a look at these long wall pieces. You'll notice that they have a smaller nail hole on either end, as well as one right there in the center. And then there's a slightly larger hole on either side, 2 or 3 inches from the edge of the piece. And these are the holes that we want to look at first. If you look at these 2 holes, you'll notice that these holes are not centered. They're actually offset, which means that they're closer to one side than they are to the other. So what we want to do is place this long wall onto our work surface so that the edge that is closer to this hole faces up. So when I set this onto the work surface, this hole is closer to the top of the piece. That's very important because this orientation is going to matter when we attach it to our field. Once we've confirmed that our piece is oriented correctly, we're going to go ahead and spread glue onto the up-facing edge. So I'm going to remove the red cap from my glue, place it into my tray, and then I'm going to spread a bead of glue onto this up-facing edge. Once I've got the glue on there, I'm going to go ahead and spread it out evenly using a finger. From there, I can go ahead and wipe my finger clean, and I can also wipe up any excess glue that may be spilling over the sides of the piece. All right, I've got all that glue cleaned up, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set this piece glued side down over a long side edge of my field. So I'm going to go ahead and flip this over so the glue faces down, and set it right onto the rabbet so that it aligns with this long side edge here. And I'm just going to take some time, I'm going to press it right up against the edge of the field, and I'm going to try to make sure that it's flush on either end. And really just take my time positioning this piece to make sure that it's positioned properly. Now it's not just going to stay in place. What I'm going to need to do is use some tape to secure it. So I'm going to go ahead and rip off a piece of tape. And I'm going to want about, 5 or 6 inches of tape. And I'm going to go ahead and position it on one end to make sure that it's completely lined up with the edge of the piece. I'm going to attach it to the bottom of the field, and then I'm going to pull it tightly and secure it onto the field. And that should be holding the piece in place for me on that side. Once I've done that on one end, you can see this piece is kind of popping off. So let's do the same thing on the other side. We're going to start by aligning our piece, wrapping the tape round underneath the field, pulling tight. And the whole time we're kind of pressing this long wall into place and then taping it off to secure it where we want it. Now, if you feel like this is nice and secure, you can stop there, or you can do one more piece kind of close to the center. So let's do that as well. So again, kind of pushing it up against the field, setting our tape, pulling tight and taping it off. And that's going to go ahead and hold this piece in place for us. We just want to double check that we don't have any gaps, that it's nice and flush, and that looks really good. We can leave it like that to allow the glue to begin to dry. Once we've done that on one side, we're going to go ahead and flip this around and do the same thing on the other side. So the first thing we're going to do is grab one of our long walls. Again, locate these larger holes, and I can see that the hole is closer to this edge, so I want that edge facing up. And I'm going to go ahead and set my glue. Once I've got the glue set, I can go ahead and spread it evenly with a finger. And now, just like before, I can wipe my finger clean and then also clean up any excess glue on my piece. And same as before, I'm just going to flip this over, glue side down, and line it up onto the rabbet on the long side edge of the field and begin to kind of align it and press it into place. Once I've got it close to where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and grab some tape. And I'm going to start on one end once again. I'll start on the left-hand side here. And I'm going to set the tape in place. Again, oops, if it pops out, that's okay. Just replace it. And you may need to get a new piece of tape. That's fine as well. So I'm going to make sure this is all lined up. I'm going to wrap the tape around underneath. My tape is getting kind of messed up here. Let's get one more piece. Make sure it's all lined up. Grab our tape. Set it on the front and underneath, and then we're going to again pull tight and attach this to the field. We've got one side secure, so let's do the same thing on the other end. Line our piece up first. Make sure it's nice and flush. If we need to move it over at all, we can. Hold it in place. Grab the tape, pull tight, and secure. And again, just to be safe, we're going to do one more near the center. All right, and just like that, we have our piece held in place on both sides. So what we're going to do now is go ahead and flip this over and set some screws to really hold these walls in place. So I'm going to flip this over, and I'm going to go ahead and open up this bag here with my screws. So let's open that up. And we can dump our screws into our tray. Now, if you take a look at the bottom of the field, you can see that each side on the long side has a hole or 3 holes over where the long side edge is going to sit. So this one's actually being covered by my tape. So I'm going to move the tape a little bit, get it out of the way. And what I'm going to do is, starting on one side, I'm going to set a screw into each of those holes. Before I begin screwing these in, I just want to double check that my wall is in a place that I'm happy with and it looks good. So what I want to do now is kind of hold it in place and set my screws. The first thing I'm going to do is take my screwdriver handle with my number 1 Phillips head bit, and I'm going to set it over the top of one of these screws, and then I'll use the hammer to lightly tap. Once I've got one, I can do the next one. And finally, the last one. Now that I've got my screws set, I'm going to use my non-dominant hand to brace the piece and hold it all together, while I use my dominant hand to turn these screws clockwise and screw them in tightly. So again, I'm making sure to apply plenty of downward pressure to hold the 2 pieces together as I screw them in. And I want these screws nice and tight, so that's that first one. Go ahead and do our second one. As tight as we can get it, and then we'll get that third one in there as well. All right, we've got those screws super tight, so let's just lift this up and start to wipe up any excess glue that might be spilling out. Check on the inside of the field as well. And then we're going to turn this around and do the same thing on the opposite end. So before I get started, I want to double check my alignment, make sure everything's lined up nicely, and then I can go ahead and set my screws. Remember, 1 into each of the holes over the long wall. Once the screws are in the holes, I'm going to go ahead and set them in place. So I'm going to use my screwdriver handle, just like that, and I'm going to tap it with the hammer. Once there, there, and there. Now I have my screws set. So again, I'm going to apply downward pressure to hold the 2 pieces together and screw in those screws. All right, I've got my screws in nice and tight. So just like before, I'm going to go ahead and wipe up any excess glue. And now I'm ready to move on to my next step, which will be to attach my short walls. All right, let's move on to attaching our short walls. So with our short walls, they don't have any holes like the long walls, so the orientation isn't as important. I'm just going to go ahead and start with one of my short walls. I'm going to set it onto my work surface just like that and spread a bead of glue onto the up-facing edge. Once I've got the glue on there, I can go ahead and spread that out evenly using a finger. I've got my glue spread out evenly, so I'm going to wipe my finger clean, and I'm also going to check to see if there's any glue spilling over and wipe the piece clean as well. Now I'm going to go ahead and set this onto one of my short side edges. It doesn't matter which one you start with. I'm going to go ahead and rotate this so it's easier to see, and I'm going to set this right here onto this short side edge. And what I want to do is just align it between my 2 long walls and make sure it's completely up against the edge of the field and sitting firmly inside that rabbet. Once I have it to a nice point, I'm going to go ahead and rip off a few pieces of tape. Oops. And just like before, I'm going to go ahead and tape this off. So again, I'm going to line it up nice and perfect. Lay the tape over the top, pull it down underneath, and then I'm going to pull tight so that it's completely lined up. and tape it off. I'm going to do the same thing on this other end here. Line it up, set the tape down the front, pull tight, and tape it off. Now that I've got one side taped, let's go ahead and do the other side. Same thing. First, we're going to set our piece down like this, add a bead of glue onto that up-facing edge, spread the glue out evenly using a finger, wipe our finger clean, clean up our piece, and then we can go ahead and set it onto the other side. Want to line it up as best we can. And then we're going to go ahead and tape it into place. So let's grab a couple pieces of tape. This first piece is going to go right here in the front. So I'm going to tape it over like that, pull tight, tape that down, and the same thing here on the other side, just to hold it in place before we secure it with our fasteners. Now that we have our short walls in place, we're actually going to be setting a couple of nails to secure them to the long walls. So I want to go ahead and open up my little hardware bag here with my 3/4 inch finish nails, and I'm just going to dump those into my tray. Once I've got the nails into the tray, I'm going to go ahead and stand this up onto its side, and you'll notice that there is a hole on either side of the long wall right over where my short walls are. So I'm going to go ahead and set one nail over this short wall and another nail over this short wall. I'm going to kind of hold the pieces together and hammer these in using my hammer. Once I've got one in on that side, I'm going to turn this around so it's towards my dominant hand and do the same thing on this side. Now I've got a nail in each of these, so I'm going to flip this over and do the same thing in the opposite long wall. Again, I'm going to set one nail into each of the holes over my short walls and then use my hammer to tap those nails in. One's in, so let's flip this around, hammer off the second one. All right, we've got our nails set, so now we can go ahead and set our screws. This is going to be very similar to what we did with our long walls. We're just going to lay this down so that the bottom of the field faces up. And I did end up covering my holes with my tape, so I'm going to need to move that tape out of the way. And I'm going to go ahead and set my screws just like I did before. 2 on this side, and then I have 2 more on the other side. And just like I did before with my long walls, I'm going to go ahead and set my screws. So I'm going to use my screwdriver handle with the #1 Phillips head bit. I'm going to set the bit right onto the screw and give it a couple of taps. Let's do that for all 4 screws. Once we have our screws properly set, we can go ahead and screw them in. So remember, while we're doing this, we want to apply plenty of downward pressure to hold the piece onto the field so that we don't have any gaps. So we're going to line up our screwdriver, apply that pressure, and begin to screw this in and get it as tight as we can. Once we have that first one screwed in, we're just going to repeat that process with the remaining 3 screws. So let's do that right now. All right, and just like that, we have the short and long walls secured to our field. So now if we want, we can go ahead and remove the tape and then do one last check to wipe up any excess glue. All right, we've got the tape off, so let's go ahead and just check for any glue. We also want to check on the inside of the field. Okay, we finished attaching our short and long walls, so the next step will be to measure out and attach our center wall. Okay, we're ready to begin to attach our center wall. But before we do that, we need to measure it out to make sure that it's perfectly centered on our field. the first thing we want to do is find the center of the piece. So a really easy way to do that is by counting the layers in the end grain edge. So if I count from the outside, I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 layers. So if there are 7 layers, I know that the 4th layer is going to be the exact middle. So I'm going to go ahead and count one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's going to be my center right there, that 4th layer. And I'm going to go ahead and mark that with my pencil. Let's do that one more time on the opposite side. So we're going to flip it around, count the layers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then we're going to count to the middle. That'll be our 4th layer. 1, 2, 3, 4. And go ahead and mark that 4th layer because we know that that's the center of the piece. So that's super easy on this piece because it has these layers to help us. But now we need to find the center of our long wall. And we aren't going to be able to use that same technique. So instead, we're going to use our measuring tape and we're going to be measuring in centimeters. So what we want to do is measure the entire piece. And we're going to go ahead and see that this piece is just about 54 centimeters. It's a little bit over 54 centimeters. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure 27 centimeters from this side and make a mark. And then we're going to measure 27 centimeters from this side and make a mark. And then we're going to find the space in between those two marks to find the exact center of the piece. So I'm going to start on one side. I'll lay out my measuring tape just like that. And remember, we're using the centimeters. So we're going to find the 20, 21, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So that's going to be 27 centimeters right there. And now I'll measure 27 from the other side. Same exact procedure. Find my 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I'm right there. And now there's a very small gap between those two pieces, or those two marks, and that's the exact center. And now I can do the same thing on the opposite side. So I'm going to go ahead and measure out 27 centimeters from this long wall. 20, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the same thing on this side. Right there. And now I've got a perfect center mark on either side, and I know exactly where to line up my center wall. So I'm going to go ahead and leave this just like that. I'm going to flip the center wall over so that this cutout faces up. And I'm going to go ahead and spread glue onto either side of the cutout. So on this side and on this side. I don't want to get any glue onto the cutout itself because it's not going to make contact with the field. Spread that glue out nice and evenly. Just like before, I'm going to wipe my finger clean and wipe up any excess glue. And then I'm going to go ahead and set this piece. And I want to make sure that that mark I made in the center of the piece aligns perfectly between those two pencil marks I made on my long walls. And so I'm going to place this in here between the long walls and try to get it in. It can be a little bit tight, so you might have to finagle it a little bit. And if you need to, you can kind of tap it down with the hammer a little bit. And once you have it in place, now you're going to want to move it over to align it in the center. So that's centered right on that line, and this side is now centered as well. So now I'm going to hold it in place, make sure it's straight, and we'll go ahead and tape it. It's held in place pretty well with the walls, but I want to tape it off just to be sure. So I'll use a piece of tape there, and then another piece of tape on the other side. Just like that, and now we have it secured in there. We've double checked that it's straight and lined up with our center marks. So what we can do now is stand this up on its side, and we're going to set a nail into it just like we did with our short walls. So right here in the center of our long wall, there is a nail hole, and we're going to set a finished nail into that hole. And that should be right over our center wall. And then we can go ahead and tap it in with our hammer. All right, we've got one nail in, so let's go ahead and flip this over. And it does look like my piece kind of jumped out while I was hammering, so I want to make sure to readjust it. And make sure it's centered again. And let's go ahead and hammer in our next nail. All right, we've got our nails set in there. That looks great. So we're going to flip this over and attach our screws. We're going to go ahead and set one screw over each of these holes in our center wall. So I've got one there and one there. And just like before, we're going to use our screwdriver handle. We're going to go ahead and set the screw. And this one as well. And then we can go ahead and screw those down nice and tight. Remember, just like before, applying plenty of downward pressure to hold the piece in place while we screw these in. And there's one. And our second one. And just like that, we have our center wall attached, so we can go ahead and remove the tape, and we can wipe up any excess glue that might have spilled out. All right, we've got all the walls attached to our project. So the last steps will be to attach our rubber bumpers and our elastic strings before we can decorate and use our battle sling. Okay, let's go ahead and attach our rubber bumpers to the bottom of our project. So we're going to go ahead and flip this over, and you might notice that you have these screws poking out that can really scratch up or damage a surface if we don't have something that's going to lift this just a little bit. And so that's where our rubber bumpers are going to come in. Now the rubber bumpers have some elastic or some adhesive on them, but we're actually going to add a little bit of glue to help that out as well. So what I'm going to do is remove one of the rubber bumpers from the adhesive, and then I'm just going to set a small drop of glue right in the center, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and set this right in the corner between these two screws. I'm going to place it and hold it in place for about 10 seconds. All right, and just like that, I have it attached. I'm going to go ahead and attach 5 more. One in the center here, another one on the corner here, this corner, the center here, and the other corner. And we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to rip it off, add a drop of glue, hold it in place for 10 seconds, and then move on to the next one. So let's go ahead and attach all of our bumpers now. Okay, and just like that, we have all of our bumpers attached, so let's carefully wipe up any excess glue. And now, not only are we stopping those screws from making contact with the table, we're also going to kind of hold our project in place when we're playing so it doesn't slide around. So the bumpers really serve 2 purposes there. The very last thing we need to do before we finish our assembly is attach our elastic strings. So if you take a look at these elastic strings, you'll see that they have these little metal tips. And what we're going to do is we're going to slide these metal tips through the holes in our long walls, and then we're going to rotate them like that to catch and lock it in place. So you remember earlier when I talked about the orientation of the walls being important, we wanted to orient it so that this hole is closer to the field. If we had put these on upside down, the hole would be too high for us to play the game. So what we're going to do is we're going to take that metal tip and we're going to slide it right through the hole in the edge of the field from the inside. We're then going to pull the string out just a little bit, pull this metal tip so that it's perpendicular, and then it should lock the string in place just like that. From there, we can do the same thing on the opposite side. So we're going to stretch the string. Be a little bit careful while you do this. Push it through, pull it out, and set it in place. So you can see that it's locked by that perpendicular metal tip. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side. So we'll set the string through, just like we did before, and then pull it to the other end. And that's what I mean about being careful, because these can fly out of your grip. And just like that, we have our strings attached on both sides, and our project is complete. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is I'm going to get this decorated, and then I can show you how to play the game. So I'll go get this decorated, and I'll be right back. All right, I got my project all decorated, and I think it turned out really nicely, but there's a couple of things that I want to let you guys know about when it comes to decorating this project. The first thing is that you don't want to put any paint onto the field. So all the detail that I did here on the field is just in marker. I actually only painted around the outside edge and on the center wall. Same with the pucks. You don't really want to paint the pucks because you don't want to create friction while you're playing. You really want them to slide smoothly. So I just used marker to decorate these as well. But even with a little bit of marker, I think it turned out really nicely. So you can still be super creative and make something that looks really awesome. Now that we've talked about how to decorate it, let's go ahead and talk about how to play the game. The object of the game is to get all of your pucks onto the other player's side of the field. So it's a 2-player game. I would play with a friend. I really like the red, so I'm going to be player 1. I would have my friend be player 2. And once we count down 1, 2, 3, go, we would each start flinging our pucks at the other side of the field to try to get them onto the other player's side. Once you get all your pucks onto the other player's side, you win the game. So you and your friend can go back and forth shooting, and whoever gets all their pucks onto the other side of the field wins the game. So I really appreciate you guys stopping by to build this with me on Elemental Hardware Enrichment. I hope you have as much fun with it as I do, and I'm looking forward to seeing you on the next one.